Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for more Worlds 2022 group analysis and content. We have gotten through half of our main stage groups so far. We've done videos on Group A, we've done a video on Group B. It is now time to jump into our third group of the group stage here, Group C, and it's certainly an interesting one. This is probably the one with the most amount of dynamics to talk about. I think some would call it a group of life. I will certainly give my opinion on that in just a bit, but if you guys are excited for this video, let me know down in the comments section below. You know I love chatting it up with all of you guys. Your opinions have been awesome over the past few days. I've been trying to get to them in the comments section. Obviously, a lot of work's going into making these videos, so if I respond like a day late, I do apologize. Hopefully, I'll be able to get to all of your guys' comments, questions, concerns, opinions. A lot of you guys have really, really great, strong opinions on who you think is good, who you think is bad. There definitely seems to be a divide in the community, and I love hearing about that down in the comment section below. So if you have anything like that, I'd love for you to post it. But with all that being said, I don't want to waste too much of you guys' time. I want to get right into the meat and the bones of this video. If you will know, if you watched the Group A and Group B videos, that what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be going through all three confirmed teams in the group so far, the Pool 1, the Pool 2, and the Pool 3 team, talking about their play style, how I think they'll perform. I will power rank all of them. This is going to be technically out of 17, but theoretically, I guess you could say it's out of 24. You guys will get kind of an idea of where my head's at, I think, for all of them. The strengths, the weaknesses, how I feel about each player, and what the upside could be like for a team like this if everything goes right. I'll be doing that for all three teams in the group, as well as at the end, I'll be giving my prediction. Which two teams do I expect to be able to make it out? How confident am I in those picks? And then I'll even talk a little bit about the most likely fourth team in a scenario like that. So let's go ahead and get to discussing here. We've got three full teams to discuss, so I don't want to waste too much time. Let's jump right into our first pool team, our Pool 1 team, and it is the #1 seed from the LEC, a team that not a lot of people expected to be hoisting the LEC trophy at the end of the year, and that is Rogue. It is their first ever title and their first ever time as the #1 seed at Worlds. This team has a history of going to the World Championships and being put in awful situations in groups. 2 years ago, they were put into a group with JDG and Damwon, which luckily for them, G2 has to suffer this year. Last year, they were put into the quote-unquote group of death with Damwon, with FPX, with Cloud9. FPX even shit the bed, and they still couldn't make it out because Cloud9 really stepped up. This Rogue team really doesn't ever seem to be able to catch a break at the World Championships, and they're going to get their shot this year because while there is some good competition in here, there really should be an opportunity for them to be able to make it out. Now, you'll notice in my power ranking, I do come in with them at number 11, and that's going to seem a lot lower than a lot of people are expecting, considering I had G2 ranked at number 8, and that's going to be insane considering Rogue just 3-0'd G2 in the finals of the LEC. But if you watched my Group B video, you will know that my opinion of G2 and Rogue honestly didn't really change all that much in the finals. Yes, Rogue was able to take that super convincingly because they were able to play their style and snowball the games out of control, but there's just so much history that you have to just forget if you want to say that Rogue is clear-cut the best team coming out of the LEC. Not only did G2 beat Rogue the week before, but at no point during these teams' existences has Rogue looked like the better team against G2, whether that's in the regular season, whether that was in the playoffs in spring. Pretty much no other time than that one series on that one day did Rogue look like even a team that was on the same level as G2, in my opinion. And so I'm still a little bit pessimistic about Rogue's chances in the grand scheme of things. Now, this is definitely a team that could prove me wrong, and they're certainly in a good position to do so. I just think they really are going to need some of their top players to step up at a world caliber level, and I have less confidence that they'll be able to do it than someone like G2, who has players on that team that at least have shown at an international level to be fantastic before. A lot of the players you're looking to step up on Rogue are newcomers to the team. Yes, you have players like Odo and Larson that have been to Worlds before, but they really haven't been the focal point of this Rogue team throughout the year. The big focal point, at least in the early game, has been Malrang. He was a big reason why this team jumped out to an absolutely ginormous early lead in summer, and or in spring, I should say, was really able to create this really imposing early game. He was great at taking over the map. He was great at securing objectives. And Larson, Odo, Trimby were really great at playing around and making sure that that map was opening up to the point where Rogue just had control of whatever area they wanted to invest in. I think Malrang did a really good job of that, and he still does that. What I said about him in the playoffs, I think definitely still stands here. When Malrang gets a lead in the game, it can feel very difficult to retake that lead from Malrang. He does a very good job of pushing his advantages. The biggest problem I've had with Malrang throughout the split has just been the fact that when he doesn't generate those advantages, he can sometimes be a little bit invisible from the game. And that's a good thing, that's a bad thing. He doesn't often run into major problems in a game, but sometimes you need your jungler, especially in the meta that I think we're going to be getting at Worlds. I think it's going to be a very jungle-oriented, jungle-focused meta. You're going to need him to be able to step up in the early game. Now, he does have players on this team that are going to help him get there, but I think a lot of pressure for the early game of Rogue is going to be placed on the early game of Malrang. You can see that in a lot of the champions he picked. Obviously, the Trundle, the Wukong. We saw later in the year him go back to his more pocket pick Jarvan. Now, Jarvan really isn't all that strong right now. I've been talking about that pretty much anytime anybody brings it out, with the exception of Malrang. He is so good at that champion, he ends up making it work, but Jarvan does have some drawbacks. He is relatively squishy for a champion whose entire goal is to go all the way in. He's someone who, if he's not ahead, he can really get blown up very quickly. Now, he does have great objective control, and he can fight early. Those are the two things that I think you really need as a jungler right now. It's just, I think he does that with a little bit more risk than some of the other ones. If he wants to keep pulling Jarvan out, I can see some of the better teams in the world being able to capitalize on that. Maybe a little bit harder than some teams in the LEC were able to. But overall, they're really going to need a player like Malrang to step up. And then the other carry point for this team has obviously been Comp. Comp has been phenomenal. This is someone who I was actually really low on going into the year. If you watched my preseason power rankings, months and months ago, I had Comp as the number 10, the last ranked AD carry in the LEC going into the year. This was someone who lost his job on Vitality to Crown Shot, who came in and really wasn't all that great anyways, wasn't even able to get an LEC spot this year. And then he gets picked up by Rogue, trying to replace Hansama, who I think you can make a good argument was the best AD carry in Europe last year. He comes in and he takes over completely seamlessly. He was in the MVP conversation pretty much throughout the entire year. He was phenomenal for this Rogue team, and he's going to have to keep up that kind of pace. He's been a great early and late game player, kind of depending on what they want to play around. Like I said, Malrang does get a lot of the early game responsibility, but a lot of that often comes in the form of Comp picking an early game bot lane, pairing it up. They were savants of the Lucian Nami lane. They were really playing it long after I really felt like it was dominant. Now, I know a lot of people have told me that this Lucian Nami lane is going to be nerfed or destroyed or unpickable at the World Championships. I think people really underestimate Pro's stubbornness in playing what they've played all year long. I would highly expect Rogue to still pull out Lucian Nami at least once, maybe if their back's up against the wall, because this is clearly what Comp and Trimby, I think, feel the most comfortable on. Trimby especially feels incredibly comfortable on the Nami. We have to remember Worlds last year where they were pulling out that Lucian Nami a ton with Hansama, and so definitely something to consider here. But even outside of that, you see a lot of picks like the Callista being really high in Comp's playlist, and that's because they really do like, when they go for that early game lead, they like to push that early game lead. Luckily for them, Comp is also a fantastic positioner in late game team fights. He's a great team fighter. And so if you do want him something a little bit more scaling, I expect to see a lot more Aphelios at this year's Worlds. If we're going to see more of that, I would expect someone like Comp to actually be able to step up and do that relatively well. Now, Trimby with him really has just been an Enchanter player all year. I think he's looked significantly better as a support on those full-time Enchanters, obviously the Lulu, the Yuumi, but things like the Soraka that he was able to pull out in the playoffs I thought looked really good. Those are the kinds of things I'm going to want to see more from this Rogue team. I really think they can take advantage of a lot of the opportunities that they create in the early game, or if they want to stay patient, if Malrang wants to invest into a more early game aggressive topside, something like the Renekton, which I do think will be viable at Worlds, I could definitely see them going to something like the Aphelios, maybe the Aphelios like Yuumi, Aphelios Lulu, these incredibly passive, safe lanes that just want to sit it out, get to late game, and then have Comp hopefully carry them home with Malrang taking a lot of the aggression early. I think the bot lane could really go either way. I think that's definitely a plus for them, the fact that I think they can play both styles relatively well. And then you have the solo laners. Talked a bit about Odoamne. He's been very good throughout the year. Not as good as I would have wanted him to be. A lot of the pressure, I think, has been taken off of him in this Rogue system because it's been put on Malrang and Comp. I think when you think of Rogue, you think of Odoamne as their best player, and for the most part, I would agree with that. I think he's the most consistent player on the team, but he's certainly not the one that receives the most resources. You can see a lot of resource-less picks in his top few. Obviously, the Renekton, but you can put resources in Renekton, but things like the Ornn, things like the Gnar, we saw him pull out the Sejuani earlier in the year. A lot of passive picks that really just want to get to that late game, be able to position well, and really keep his AD carry safe. That's something we've seen more out of Odo this year. I'm curious to see if that's going to continue. I have a sneaking suspicion that we're going to be getting a lot more tanks in the top lane at the World Championships, a lot more passive of a top lane meta. If that does end up coming true, I think Rogue has at least relatively prepared for that. I'm not going to say it's going to play entirely into their strengths, because Odo on carry champions can still be a huge nuisance for pretty much anybody to play into, but they are ready to go to a tank matchup. Odo isn't someone who's been given all the resources all year, and they're relying on that top lane matchup to carry. They are perfectly fine moving resources away from the top side, moving into the bot side, and being able to play around that lane if they have to. But it's really, really, really good to have a player like Odo Omni in the top lane that if you need to be able to take over that lane, you definitely have the option to. And we'll talk about it later. This isn't exactly the strongest group of top laners in the world. And so if Odo was ever going to be put in a situation for him to be able to take over the game, I think this group is probably going to be it. And then you also have Larssen here in the mid lane. Now, I am definitely a little bit lower on Larssen, I think, generally, than a lot of other people. He was really good in the finals, and I would expect them to go back to a lot of the picks that he really succeeded on there. You know, obviously, we see a lot of Azir, we see a lot of Ahri, even the Talia coming out, which obviously they're not going to pick. For some reason, teams continue to ban Talia against Rogue. Larssen has shown on multiple occasions that he just does not pilot that champion at a world-class level. Hell, even at an LEC level, I don't think he can pilot Talia. It's not something I'm expecting them to pull out, but him on some more mage-oriented carries, even something like the Orianna, I could see coming out from them. I think a team like Cloud9 is a really good idea for what they might want to do in the early game if they do want to go that route, but you know, things like the Azir, things like the Ahri, some more standard picks in the mid lane, obviously is what Larssen, I think, thrives on. Now, he's a good enough player to be able to go even, I think, with pretty much anybody on the world stage. It's definitely not the hardest group of all when it comes to mid laners as well, and so there's definitely opportunity, I think, for Larssen to just be kind of a rock in the mid lane, but luckily for Rogue, they really haven't relied on him at all this year to be the carrying presence. He's the one who I think receives the least amount of resources of anybody on the team, obviously barring Trimby. You know, of any of the four major, like, carry roles, Larssen, I think, receives the least amount in that exchange, and I think that really works for Rogue. Larssen, I think, is a very good secondary player. I think he can play this Azir, play this Ahri, be able to shove his lane out, either play safe in lane, be able to roam along with Malring to create plays around Dragon, to create plays around Herald. I think those kinds of opportunities are good for Larssen overall. Maybe even things like the Victor, like I said, the Orianna, those could be pulled out for Larssen at Worlds this year. I do think all of those picks are relatively okay, and so overall, what are Rogue's strengths and what are their weaknesses? Well, I think their strengths are the playstyle ideology. Really, I think this team has basically mastered draft. They are, in my opinion, one of the best drafting teams in the world. And I've said that multiple times throughout the LEC like recaps and everything. I don't think this team has like ridiculous amounts of talent, but they are really able to hide a lot of their flaws in terms of mechanical skill because they're often in positions where they can take advantage of their champion's strengths. So whether or not it's playing to Malring's aggressiveness in the early game on picks like Jarvan, on picks like Trundle, or knowing that comp can really carry if he does get that snowball out of control. I think oftentimes you're walking out of draft saying that Rogue won it, and if they can translate that to the world stage, they're probably going to be in a better spot than a lot of the other Western teams that just kind of go balls to the wall. Now, that does come with its own set of weaknesses, and its own weaknesses, if they don't really get that draft off, if they don't get this like awesome draft combo where they can really take advantage of the enemy team's susceptibility to a specific pick or two picks, they're not really in a position to win games a lot. They're really not all that talented in comparison to like the other best teams in the world, like teams that are going to try and get out of a group stage. They are a really smart team that is able to take advantage of a lot of the weaknesses that their opponents show. They're really smart around objectives. They have phenomenal macro, but their like laning prowess, their just straight laning prowess has not really been all that good this year. They've been able to be taken advantage of by more aggressive, more compact laners. And when you're in a group with a team like Top Esports, that's definitely something I would be a little bit worried about. But in the end, honestly, macro can outplay a lot of your limitations in lane, and I think that's what we've seen out of Rogue throughout the majority of the year. If they can get to that mid or late game with a draft that they feel comfortable on, with a 4 or 5k gold lead, they're going to be in a good spot to beat pretty much anybody in this group because their consistency can be really high. It's just about making sure that you can get to that spot, because if you do, this Rogue team could really surprise a lot of people, and even, honestly, I think of all the Western teams, they probably have the best shot of getting out of their group. All right, now that we've got the Pool 1 out of the way, we have talked about Rogue, we've talked about their strengths, their weaknesses, it's time to get to our Pool 2 seed here, and now we finally get to talk about the group favorite. I think for a lot of people, this seems like a pretty good draw for them for the most part, and that is our LPL 2 seed coming here as the Pool 2 seed, being Top Esports. This is the team that was in first place for a majority of the LPL season, came into the playoffs as the number 1 seed, but couldn't quite get it done against JD Gaming in a really fun finals, a more fun winners finals, I will say. Some phenomenal best of fives against JDG, the team that ended up being the LPL number 1. But it's not like Top Esports is really all that far off from being that. So where do they come in for me? Well, they come in at number 3 in my power rankings. And I've talked about this. This really is one of my least controversial takes, I think, of all of them. I think the way I'll phrase this is if I was sorting a lot of these teams into tiers, I would say that 1 and 2 are like the Giga S tier, right? Like they're like the top of the top. They are the S plus, whatever you want to call them. The top 2 teams, I think, are clearly the top 2 teams. I think Top Esports at number 3 is by themselves in the tier alone, like in just regular S tier. I think Top Esports is kind of by themselves at that number 3. They are, I think, a significant amount better than the majority of other teams at this tournament, but I'm really not confident about their consistency to be able to take down the top 2 teams in this tournament in a best of 5. Obviously, they will get the chance to prove me wrong. This is a team that I predicted to go to Worlds as the number 1 seed all the way back in spring. This was somebody, a team that I was very, very hyped about, even when a lot of other people were significantly less confident in their abilities coming off of a season where they weren't able to make the World Championships. I was very much predicting a bounce back, and it very much came true here. So what ended up happening for them to get to this point? Well, we've talked about some jungle mid duos, most especially in Group B, that have really been like game-changing. I think you could make a real case that Tian and Knight are one of, if not the best jungle mid duos in the world. In my opinion, they come in number 2 on that list, only behind Genji, who we will talk about in Group D. But Tian and Knight are genuinely fantastic. They are phenomenal, 2 of the best players in their roles in the world, period, end of story. And for me, this is going to be a relatively controversial opinion. I think Knight's the best player in the world. I think Knight right now is the best League of Legends player in the world. Really, I'm not going to argue if you want to put Chovy above him. It's those 2. They're 1A, 1B at the end of the day. But for me, I just like Knight's consistency. I think he does it a little bit more. I'm a little bit more worried about the best of 5 stuff that we saw this split, but I expect him to be able to turn it around, and Worlds is going to be a lot of fun this year, I think, to watch just in general, and a lot of that is because Knight is here. Now, Knight gets drawn into probably the best possible group he could get drawn into. Not only is TES in a really good spot to just straight up be able to win this group, almost 6-0. Like, I'm not going to, spoil anything, but this is a really good group for Top Esports. But this is a pretty weak mid lane group. You're talking about a team like Rogue, who I think likes to play pretty much everywhere except mid lane. They really don't like to put a lot of pressure into that. Same with Gigabyte Marines. They don't really invest a ton into that mid lane, even though when they do, it can go relatively okay. A lot of it is out of the mid lane. And then even the team that, I'm not going to speak about the 4th team because we don't know who it will be yet, but if it is DRX, it's not like, they're unflappable in the mid lane either. And so for Top Esports to be sitting here in that group with Knight, especially with Tian, wanting to invest in that, especially later into the playoffs, I mean, that is an absolute win for Top Esports, and I think there's a real chance that we're looking at Knight as the most dominant player in the group stage coming out of this. He's basically put in a perfect situation to completely succeed and to destroy everybody else in this group. We're going to see a lot of Ari, we're going to see a lot of Silas, but we're also going to see some Talia. We're going to see him be able to facilitate for the rest of the team, because it's not just Knight, right? Knight's a phenomenal carry player, but you've got carry players on this team. Do not worry about that. I started to talk about Tian a little bit. He went a lot more to the enabler role, I think, this year. He was a little bit more of a carry, I think, in his previous, Worlds experiences. And I think we could definitely see that again here at this World Championships because, like I said, I have a sinking suspicion that this year is going to be a very jungle-focused meta at Worlds. And so if that ends up being the case, someone like Tian, I think definitely could take advantage of that. Obviously, the Wukong, the Poppy, the Viego, things like that coming out a lot for Tian, but he is someone who is very good on the enablers as well. If you need him to pull out the Trundle, he can do that. Obviously, we see the Poppy here. That's more of an enabler. He can do that. He really is kind of the complete package when it comes to junglers. He was the LPL MVP for a reason, even if I personally didn't even have him in my top 4 or whatever. He won the LPL MVP for a reason. He was able to control the game incredibly efficiently from that jungle position, set up his entire team for a good amount of success, and is a huge reason why Top Esports is one of the best teams in the world. But you do have that jungle mid duo. Well, what do you have outside of that? Oh, only Jackie Love in the bottom lane, right? Like the LPL prodigy in the bottom lane. So I guess you could say this team does have a pretty strong dynamic in between a lot of their laners. Let's say that Knight is getting a lot of focus in the mid lane. Tian needs to create pressure elsewhere. Well, you can invest into JackeyLove, whether that's early, whether that's late. Obviously, incredibly known for his Ezreal play, but we saw him pull out the Zeri a ton. We know he's able to scale into the late game, be able to play aggressive towards the back half. It's definitely a little bit of a risk with him, but Tian can play to this bot side, completely ignore, in my opinion, the best player of the world, and be in a really good spot. That's something that only the best teams in the world even have the option of doing, and that's why, in my opinion, there's a pretty clear gap after third place in my power rankings between them and everybody else, because everybody else, I think, does have very defined strengths, but TES has so many strengths that it's pretty much impossible to be able to take all of them out in one game. You just have to hope that you're able to outplay them in their position, and it's just a really tough thing to do. JackeyLove is an incredibly strong carry. We saw that multiple times throughout the playoffs where he would single-handedly win top esports series. Now, on that same token, he still is JackeyLove. I promise you, this is the same JackeyLove you know, you love, you remember. This is the same player that, while he can carry the game here on Ezreal and on Zeri, he can also get himself into really big problems and really big trouble towards the back half of games. His positioning is sometimes way too aggressive, and that can definitely be a problem for this team late game if they're relying on him to win a lot of these team fights. We saw that against JDG, where there were moments that he stepped up to try and be able to do as much damage as he could, immediately got caught, died, and then there was no way TES was going to be able to win those team fights. That can be a little bit of an issue for top esports when you're relying so much on JackeyLove, but ideally, in a world where you have Tian, Knight, you're going to have someone else on the team that can be a primary or a secondary damage dealer in case JackeyLove doesn't dominate the game quite like he can. And that leaves JackeyLove the opportunity to play as aggressive as he wants. That's really been the focus point, the golden point, I would say, for top esports all year long, is you're investing a ton into Knight and Tian in the jungle, and it's pulling pressure away from that bot lane, so JackeyLove and Mark don't really have to worry a ton about jungle attention and can just go balls to the wall in lane trying to generate that lead because they are the most mechanically talented bot lane in the LPL. And that brings us to Mark at the support position. This is someone who didn't have a team at the beginning of the year, and now he's sitting here as one of the best supports in the world, in my opinion. Him and JackeyLove have a perfect synergy together because they are both absolutely psychotic in lane. They are both so aggressive, and they both play to win. They don't play to go even, they play to win. And I think that has only helped both of them in the long run here. They were both kind of good players for a while, but they never really found a ton of success. I mean, JackeyLove obviously winning the World Championship, but, you know, outside of that, like, the years following that, after 2018, he wasn't really able to dominate in the same way that we had expected him to. Mark really wasn't ever that, like, dominant support, always playing with, you know, average AD carries, I would say. You know, he made Worlds a couple of years ago on LGD, but outside of that, really never dominating the game. You put them together, though, and their aggressive playstyles mesh so well together, it allows JackeyLove to play so aggro in laning phase because he has a support like Mark that's willing to back him up. And even when Mark isn't playing ridiculously aggro, he's playing super protective. We still see a lot of engagers out of him. He's not the most enchanter-oriented player. That can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing. I do like the fact that he has pivoted to the Braum. I think that is basically perfect for what these two want to do in the bot lane during laning phase, because Braum can be ridiculously aggressive, but can also be a huge protection for someone who's overextending like JackeyLove tends to. And so overall, I would still expect this bot lane to be able to dominate a lot of the teams that just aren't on the same level as them. The only time I'm ever going to get concerned about these two is when they start playing some of the best teams in the world in a best of 5, because I do think they can be a little bit targetable in draft, and then if you want to build an entire game plan about making sure JackeyLove doesn't get online and Mark can't enable that, it certainly is shown to be possible, as we saw with what JDG was able to do in the finals, and in winners finals as well. And so, while JackeyLove and Mark are great, they're definitely not perfect. Then you have rookie Wayward in the top lane. Now, not a lot of rookies here at the World Championship. Wayward definitely being one of them is great for him. He was my pick for Rookie of the Year. A lot of people were really sour on him towards the back half of the year because he didn't have the best end of the split. Got benched in the last week of the season because he had a bad game. Gets brought back in for playoffs and is pretty good, honestly. Certainly not the problem, but he has been more of a tank player all year. Tian, Knight, JackeyLove, they are such strong points of the map that you really want to invest resources into him, or into them, all of them, that you're really not in a position to be able to give Wayward all of the resources that he needs. And that's why I was talking about Odo in a situation where if they did want to invest in that top side, it's really not going to be that hard for them to be able to do that. None of the teams in this group really play around top side the way that Rogue, I think, generally could. Top Esports definitely falls in that category. That's not to say Wayward can't carry games. Obviously, a ton of Gwen this year, and he is able to do a lot of damage when he does get it, but especially if we are moving to a more tank-favored meta in the top lane, I would expect TES to just roll with the punches, be able to pick up a lot of those tanks, and just invest their resources elsewhere. Wayward is a good player, but I don't expect they're going to be putting a lot of the responsibility on him to be able to win the games here at the World Championships. So what does that mean for this team? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? Well, the strengths are the toppest of top tier talent in the world. This is something I'm really only going to talk about with some of the best teams in the world, but when you have Knight, when you have Jackie Love, when you have Tion, you're automatically a world favorite. Like, there is absolutely nothing you can do to not be a world favorite because you can win any game in the world at any time because those players are that good. They can beat anybody at any time. There are not a lot of players in the world that qualify for that. Those three do, and so Top Esports are always going to be a world contender. Not only that, but I think they have a really good idea of how they want to play the game. They know they have a player in Knight who's good with resources and without resources, and so they can mix up their game plans. They can invest in Knight on the Ahri, on the Sylas, make sure that he's in a position to basically 1v9 towards the back half of these games, or if they want to put Knight on something like the Talia, even like the Ahri or the Sylas, and not invest as much into him, he's great pairing up with Tion, moving towards objectives, playing towards that bot side, being that secondary carry that we know can be incredibly influential in the mid lane right now in this particular meta. He's adept and phenomenal at both, and so I would expect this Top Esports team to really shake up their style, not get caught in one particular pattern, and just kind of push through. Those are the big strengths. Now, weaknesses for this team, they can sometimes get caught being a tad bit over-aggressive, and if that happens, oftentimes they can be in a bad spot towards the late game if they get there. Now, they're a really good early game team. Oftentimes they don't even get to the late game, but in the late game, if they get there and Jackie Love gets caught, you can sometimes be in a position where you can see a lead that Top Esports has disintegrate. And so a little bit more consistency towards the back half of the game is something I would really like to see from this team. Outside of that, I really don't have a ton of concerns. I think Wayward, quote-unquote, could be a concern, but in this group, I don't really think there's a lot of people that can take advantage of it. And so overall, I see Top Esports as pretty much a win-win team in this group. They come in at third in my power rankings, and I think for a lot of people, me included, they should be heavy favorites to be coming out as number one in Group C. All right, now that we've got the Pool 1 and Pool 2 teams finished up with, only one more team to talk about here in Group C, at least of the teams that are officially locked into the group, and it's our first wildcard team that we're going to be talking about at Worlds here in 2022. Of course, it is going to be the winner of the VCS here with GAM Esports, formerly known as, Gigabyte Marines, now GAM. Definitely going to have to get used to that if I slip up at any point. Not only in this video, but throughout Worlds coverage, I do apologize. I'm doing my absolute best to call them GAM and not Gigabyte Marines. But let's talk about what they did here and where they come in my ideology, my power rankings, all that kind of stuff. What do I think of this team? Because we really haven't gotten to a lot of the minor regions yet. As you guys know, I cover the 4 major regions on this channel. I cover LCS, LEC, LCK, and LPL. But I do watch all of the other regions when I need to for big international tournaments. I've gotten through pretty much all of the playoffs from every minor region that's going to be represented at Worlds this year, and honestly, VCS is clearly the region that impressed me the most. I was actually really impressed with the quality of gameplay and really the aggression that we were seeing out of a lot of the VCS teams. A lot of teams in minor regions can be really aggressive, but only against bad teams. I have a really sneaking suspicion that GAM is going to be the best team that I have yet to talk about on this channel. So I have them power ranked as such. They come in at number 16 in my power rankings. And that may be very low to some of you, but in my opinion, that is the number 1 wildcard region team at this tournament. Obviously, 15 major region teams at this tournament this year because EU got an extra seed. And so they come in at number 16. I do think there is a little bit of a gap between the 4 major regions and everybody else right now. But if anybody were to close that gap, I actually think the VCS are closer than anybody else, and it's really impressive considering the fact that this team has not been able to go to Worlds the past 2 years. I'm not sure if you guys have been keeping up with it, but obviously what with everything going on, the global pandemic, I'm not going to get into that on this channel, but with everything going on, the VCS really hasn't been able to attend Worlds over the past 2 years, so we've had some really good teams that I think unfortunately just haven't gotten the chance to show up on the biggest stage. They get their opportunity again this year. GAM gets their shot in main group stage by winning the finals over a Saigon Buffalo team that really everybody expected to be coming in here as the number 1 seed. GAM looked great in the finals, and it's off the back of a few players that you might have heard of, but have definitely played a lot better this year than they have in recent years. Obviously, the player that I think most people are going to be familiar with on this team is going to be Levy in the jungle. And whether or not you're familiar with him from previous GAM teams in the past on the world stage, where they were able to create a lot of buzz and really shake up Worlds, back in like the late 2010s, they were kind of a crazy team. I remember one specific World Championships where they were really they were very close to making it out of group stage. And Levy has kind of been around for all of that, and he's the same player that you would have remembered back then. He is still this incredibly aggressive meta shakeup jungler that can really set tempo and really put a lot of people off counter when they have to play against him. You can see his number 2 most played champion this split was Nocturne, and Nocturne, while being playable, is certainly not like the highest priority jungler in the world right now. This is something that he was super known for back in the day. Hell, it even got him a spot in LCS for a little while on 100 Thieves Academy. You know, he got brought up to the main roster, all that stuff, blah, 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 blah. But, like, he's always been known for his Nocturne play, and honestly, I think this team really thrives off of the fact that Levy just goes balls to the wall in the early game trying to create an advantage. We see a lot of Wukong, we see a lot of Nocturne, and we really see a lot of supportive play coming up from the top side of the map. Whether it's Kiaya on a lot of top laners that do want to group and fight in these big coordinated team fights, or Kati on someone who just doesn't really want to dominate that much in lane, much more passive. Really, this team's early game does revolve a ton around what Levy wants to do in that jungle position. So if he's ahead, GAM is typically ahead. And that's why I actually think they could be a pretty big surprise to a lot of teams that are playing here at Worlds this year. I don't think a lot of teams are going to take them as seriously as they probably need to. This is a team that can genuinely take a game off of pretty much anybody in the world if they're not prepared. And that's pretty scary to go into. But it's not just the jungle position where they have the talent to be able to kind of surprise a lot of people. I actually think their bot lane is pretty criminally underrated, and that's because I just don't think a lot of people watch the VCS, but Style and BA were really, really phenomenal throughout this team's playoff run. They were clearly the main focal point for everything that GAM wanted to do, and really the best way I can describe this team's ideology as a whole, but most specifically what this bot lane is trying to do. This team very much plays like it's 2021 and not 2022. And that I think can be good. It can also be bad, which we will get to, but it's good for them in the sense of they really like to play heavy aggro in the bot lane, try to get kills early on in the 2v2 so that they can snowball that lane out of control. Levy does a lot to be able to enable that lane. Obviously, get some help from Kiaya and Kati in the early game in the top side of the map, but really tries to invest a lot of that pressure that he's able to create towards Style and BA towards the back half of the early game, like around 6-7 minutes, to make sure that when Style is on picks like the Sivir Zeri, which they went to all the time, or even something like the Jinx, something that can hyper carry towards the back half of the game, they can do a lot with it. And BA really has not adopted this Enchanter meta that I think a lot of other teams have gone to. He plays a lot of engagers. He's still playing a lot of Nautilus, the engager that's really been relevant for most of the year, but a lot of Tahm Kench as well, and this team has really not been afraid to play the Senna either. Really things that want to accelerate into the late game very passively in the bottom lane, but Levy does a really good job of being able to enable that bot lane, be able to create pressure on the top side, be able to push forward on the bot side, make sure that they have objective control, and really just out macro the enemy team to the point where their aggression can really make up for the fact that they're scaling in the bottom lane. And I'm not quite sure still how that's going to translate to a higher stage of play, but all I know is that Levy, Style, and BA are the 3 players on this team that I think you have to look out for the absolute most. And if they're clicking, I really do think they can take games off of a team like Rogue. If a team like DRX gets slid in here, I think they could take a game off of a team like DRX. They're actually a really, really scary team because of the pure amount of fear that they don't have. They have absolutely no fear. They're willing to play with aggression. They're willing to have these crazy off-meta picks and just kind of play to their style. And I think for a minor region team, that's actually a great idea to have. And so for GAM, those 3 I think are going to be crucial towards this team's success about whether or not it can really surprise a lot of people in this stage. But then you've got the solo laners. This is where I get a little bit more concerned, at least in the grand scheme of things for GAM. While Kiaya and Kati are good players, I don't think that they are world-class players. I do think Levy, Style, and BA are really, really good players, like players that I don't think would be out of place in NA or EU in terms of talent level. But Kiaya and Kati, I just don't know if I agree with that. Kiaya, I do think, has moments. He's definitely not the lane bully that I think you're going to want at that position. They don't really invest a lot of resources into him from what I saw in the playoffs. We're seeing a lot of Gnar, we're seeing a lot of Aatrox, but we do sometimes see them go to the split push ideology. I'm not sure if they're going to do that on the world stage. Like I said, I think we're going to more of a tank meta, but even outside of that, this team really has thrived in the VCS off of picking 3 winning lanes and an aggressive jungler. I'm not sure they're going to get the chance to do that on the world stage because if you do that and you don't win lane, your game is completely and utterly screwed. I could see them, if they needed to take kind of a concession in draft, something that's going to be a little bit safer that goes into the late game, I could see that being more of a passive pick in the top lane. But if they do want to go back to this Jax, this Fiora, that they have picked up a couple of times this split, theoretically, I guess you could have an aggressive pick in the top lane, some more scaling pick in the bot lane, and then play through top. It's just not something that I think they've done all that regularly. They definitely like style to be the big carry towards the back half of the game. And then there's Kati in the mid lane, who, talk about 2021 meta, like, he has completely rejected the 2022 meta of Talia, Sylas, Lissandra, Ahri. He just doesn't play those things. He plays control mages and he plays Corki. And sure, like, they're not all that good right now. I've talked about this on the channel. Certainly not something I recommend, but if you're ever going to break the meta, at least be good at it. And Kati clearly is a very good Corki player. He can play the Victor, he can play the Rise. He's pulled out the Vex a couple of times and gotten a really good play in a couple team fights with that. A lot of mages, a lot of engage mages, some things that scale a lot better into the late game. He's also really good at playing side waves, so that could be something that they want to go to. If they do end up going with the Jax Fiora, a 1-3-1 is something I could definitely see them trying to employ if they can get style online. I just don't know how consistent that is going to be for this team, and so it's kind of the breakdown as far as I'm aware. Levy playing hyper-aggressive, super aggro pretty much the whole game, but especially in the early game, making sure that players like Style and BA are in a good spot to be able to carry that lead into the late game. If they're not able to generate that lead, I don't really see this being a team that's able to come back from a deficit. They just don't have the, like, one-to-one skill to be able to come back, but they are the kind of team that will make, like, insane plays that other teams just won't see coming. They might be able to get picks from random vision spots, things like that. Things that, maybe some top teams just aren't expecting as easily. I think GAM is going to do a really good job of surprising teams, as they have done pretty much all year long in the VCS. They did it in the playoffs as well, and so positives for this team, the aggression. I always want to see a minor region team come to Worlds and play like they have nothing to lose, because truly they don't. And so I really hope this team comes into group stage and really just leaves it all out onto the Rift. Let's not play passive. Let's not try to play scaling. Let's not try to play safe. Let's play our style. Let's play aggro, and let's play to win. If we can generate that lead, maybe snowball the game out of control, we might be in a spot that by 15 minutes, we have the game in our hands, as long as we don't F up. And I think that's really realistic for a team like this, especially in a group where I do think there are teams that aren't the most consistent. So I really do think this is a team that could surprisingly pick up quite a few games here. The weakness, of course, is just going to be general skill level. While Levy is incredibly aggressive, he can often get caught out for that aggressiveness. Style and BA, while they are the focal point for GAM, often do need resources in order to get online, or at least that's how it's been in recent weeks. And so if they're not getting a lot from Levy, if Levy can't get online, I don't really see a world in which this GAM team can really push forward. I think a lot of it is on their jungler, but he is a very good jungler. And then also, I think 1v1 in the solo lanes could be a little bit of a problem for these two teams. I talked about top lane being a little bit of an exploitable issue for pretty much everybody in the group if one of the members steps up from top or rogue. And I think Kiaya could definitely be victim to that. I really wasn't all that impressed with this play in the top lane, although he very much could turn that around for me. And then Katsi, I just don't think is that kind of player. He's very young. He seems relatively inexperienced being the main carry on a very good team. Maybe he can change that around, but it just doesn't seem to be GAM's playstyle. Very similar to what Rogue is offering. I think Kati is more of a facilitator for the jungle and for the bot lane than he is like a mid lane carry himself. And for him to be in a lane in a group with Knight, I'm just not sure that's the best possible matchup for GAM here. And so they definitely have strengths, but they definitely have weaknesses. They come in as my #1 team out of the minor regions. If they were to pick off some upsets on Rogue or DRX, I honestly wouldn't be that surprised. It is going to take a lot more than just a few games, though, for them to get out of this group. But if any minor region team is going to do it, I have a pretty high probability that it will be this one. All right, that is going to do it for my full in-depth review of all three teams that are locked in here in Group C. We went over Rogue, we went over Top, we went over GAM. It is now time for me to give my predictions on how this group is going to go. And just so you know, as I have done with the previous two groups, I will be talking about likely fourth teams in this group. Now, I'll be doing full deep dives into all of the teams that are in the play-in stage when I do my play-in review a little bit in a couple of days, but I will be talking about the most likely outcome here, and I think a lot of people would expect that the most likely outcome is going to be DRX. If they do make it out of group stage, which I would say is pretty likely considering their talent level, they will be slotted here into Group C, the only other group without an LCK team. So we're going to go under the assumption that DRX is the fourth team here. This theoretically could be other teams as well if DRX were to not make it out of group stage, or play-in stage, but I find that to be very, very unlikely in the grand scheme of things. So, where do all of these teams come in? Well, like I said before, Top Esports is a pretty easy choice for #1 in this group, in my opinion. I think this is probably the best draw they could have gotten. Not only did they get are, in my opinion, the weakest Pool 1 seed. I do have Rogue, as you saw if you watched the Group A, power ranked below Cloud9. I think Cloud9's the better team. But they also got a minor region team as their Pool 3. They really only have to worry about the LCK team, but it's the worst of the LCK teams by a considerable margin. Really the only team of the 2 Eastern regions that I have not in, like, the big 7 that I think are really untouchable at this tournament. And so, if you're TES, you are thanking the heavens. You probably got the easiest possible group draw you could have gotten. I have a very hard time predicting anybody to get first in this group outside of Top Esports. They should be able to waltz to this. If they go 6-0 in this group, I honestly wouldn't be all that surprised. But the 2 and 3 and 4 spots, I think, are all a little bit up for debate. For me, personally, I'm going to slot DRX into that number 2 seed right now. The way they look towards the back half of the gauntlet, once they put Juhan in the jungle, they look significantly more consistent. And I think the talent level of this team is going to rise once we get into an international tournament where things can start to even out a bit. This is a team, I don't want to get too into depth with them because I will, but they play a lot through mid lane, through that jungle position with a really stable bot lane as long as Beryl isn't completely running it down like he did a ton this year. And then top lane has been a little bit of an issue, but honestly, Kingen, I think you could make a real argument, had his best year in the LCK this year for DRX. And so, overall, I see this team as just slightly better than Rogue. If Rogue were to take this number 2 spot, I wouldn't be all that surprised. Really, the difference between DRX at 2 and Rogue at 3 for me in my predictions is incredibly small. And if Rogue ends up beating them twice, I'm not going to be shocked if DRX ends up beating them twice. I'm not going to be shocked if they split games. I'm not going to be shocked. Either way, I think things are going to go relatively as expected for the rest of the group. A team like GAM, I do think, has the potential to create some upsets. I do think this could be the group that one of the teams just randomly flames out in. We've kind of seen this throughout the years, that there's at least one team at Worlds in the group stage that just for one reason or another can't pick up a win to save their life. Obviously, last year it was FPX. That could be a team like DRX or a team like Rogue. I think in the group stage this year, I think that is a realistic probability, or possibility, I should say, because GAM is one of those teams that I think really can cause these teams problems, especially DRX and Rogue, teams that are really momentum reliant. If they're not on a roll, they can definitely get into a slump that can probably push them down this group stage prediction. But for me, I'm very, very confident about putting Top Esports at number 1, and then everybody else is just kind of there. GAM definitely comes in at number 4 for me, but if they ended the group number 3, I really wouldn't be all that surprised. Now, if they made it out at number 2, I would be stunned. But if they were to take a game, if one of the other 2 teams were to completely shit the bed, I'm not going to be entirely blown back, but whether it's DRX making it out, whether it's Rogue making it out as that 2nd seed, I'm really not going to be too shocked either way. I really just think it's about who gets hot at the right time. So for me, I'm going to pick DRX just because of the consistency they showed at the back end of the year, but I really do hope Rogue proves me wrong because I think this really is the West's best chance of getting out of the group stage. But that's going to do it for the video. If you guys enjoyed, let me know down in the comment section below. Obviously, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of you that don't agree with my takes, and that's great. I love that. I love having this discussion with you guys. I love hearing why I should have put Rogue at number 2, definitively, why DRX deserves to be number 4, why GAM is going to win the group, whatever you want to talk about. Let me know about it down in the comments section below. I love chatting it up with you guys. And of course, if you did enjoy the video, feel free to press that like button. It really does help out the channel a ton. It lets me know that you guys are enjoying this Worlds content, that we are putting a ton of effort into getting ready for you guys. And then also, if you want to see more Worlds content, we've got Group D, we've got the play-ins groups coming around. We've also got our top 20 list for all of the players at Worlds that will be dropping a little bit before the World Championships, and a meta report that we're going to be doing on the picks that you can expect to see there. If you are interested in that, please, please, please hit the subscribe button. We're going to be posting a ton of stuff leading up to the World Championships, and then obviously all throughout the tournament as well. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.